Hi, I'm Chris Sangster, and welcome back to the studio. Today, I want to let you in on a secret. 5 secrets, in fact. These are mixing tricks that I use on almost every mix that a lot of people would consider cheating. Things that the conventional wisdom around mixing has deemed wrong. Why is this the case? Well, in a lot of ways, the discourse around music making and mixing specifically is very traditionalist. And that's for good reason. Certain techniques have been around for decades and decades and have produced great results for a long time. So I do understand where the desire to follow the traditional rules comes from. But in some cases, these rules are misguided or honestly outright wrong, especially when talking about modern mixing in a DAW. So let's dispel some myths and dive into these 5 hacks that are guaranteed to improve your mixes. And the best part is, every single one of them is possible using only Logic Pro stock plugins. Number 1, a limiter on the mix bus. I have a limiter as the last plugin on my mix bus for the entire mixing process. I literally never listen to my mix without the limiter on. It's enabled on my template with very moderate settings, and I always run all of my tracks through it. You may have heard that limiters are only for mastering, or that you need to put any dynamics processing on your mix bus at the end of your mixing process. Neither of these are true. In fact, they couldn't be further from the truth. So what's the thought process? Why put a limiter on the mix bus at the beginning of mixing? 2 reasons. First, by having the limiter as the very last plugin in the mix bus chain, it prevents the stereo output from clipping. Although my gain staging process virtually guarantees that I don't clip my mix bus just with my tracks, check out my gain staging video right up here if you haven't already, there is still the possibility of clipping the mix bus when mixing, especially when we're EQing. When boosting and sweeping around the frequency spectrum to find the area we want to EQ, we are creating this huge frequency boost, and that can very often create clipping on the mix bus. Check out what happens if I get rid of the limiter and then create a big boost in the low end of the kick drum. Hear that distortion? That's the mix bus clipping. We want to avoid this because we don't want to be fooled by that sound of the mix bus clipping. We might mistakenly think a frequency is creating a problem in the track when really the extreme boost is just causing mix bus clipping. The second reason is that I want my mix to sound full and powerful as soon as possible. I'm not trying to bring the song up to a master level right away, but I do want a little level boost and the subtle gluing effect that the limiter provides. At the end of the day, the final result is going to have a limiter on it, right? So why not get it on there right from the beginning? It also lets me know how aggressive my track levels are by seeing if there's any gain reduction happening on the limiter. My goal is to not have the limiter working very hard, if at all, when mixing, just providing that small level boost and the safeguard against clipping. If I see that there's a lot of gain reduction happening on the limiter while I'm mixing, chances are something is off in either my track levels or the other plugins on my mix bus. Here is how I would set up the adaptive limiter in Logic Pro to act as the final stage limiter on my mix bus. In the adaptive limiter, first turn true peak detection on. This slightly changes the function of the limiter to better prevent intersample peaks. Although this will not be an issue while mixing, it is the type of limiter I will be using during mastering. So I like to keep it consistent to get an idea of how the mix responds to the type of limiter that will be used during mastering. I also turn remove DC offset off. This setting will apply a low cut filter to the signal in order to remove noise caused by low quality audio equipment. And I find it a quite unnecessary feature to have in a limiter. Any low cut filtering should be done in the mix, and if DC offset, that is a shifting of the waveform off center, is present in any tracks, it should be addressed before the limiter stage. I generally leave the look ahead at its default of 50 milliseconds. I don't find that changing the look-ahead value changes the sound all that much, as it's just defining the amount of buffer time the limiter has to do its calculation before applying the gain reduction. But the two most important settings are the output ceiling and the gain knob, and each directly impacts our two goals of using the limiter in mixing. The output ceiling is how we prevent clipping. Wherever we set this value will be the maximum value that the mix bus will ever get to. Anytime the signal rises above the value set here, the gain reduction will be applied to bring the signal back down to this ceiling. For mixing, I like to set this very conservatively at -1 dB. I may change this during mastering to squeeze a little more level out of the song, but for mixing, I find it's best to err on the lower side with the ceiling. Then the gain knob is how we get that level boost, and the ratio between the two knobs will directly affect how much gain reduction is applied. Since we don't want a lot, if any, gain reduction going on during mixing, again I'm going to set this very conservatively at +2 dBs. That's enough to get the slight level boost and thickening we want, but not enough to cause an excessive amount of limiting. As we can see here, there's no gain reduction happening at all in this song, but the sound is still fuller and more glued together with the limiter on. The key takeaway here is don't slam your mix with the limiter right away. Use it subtly and you'll get a better picture of how your mix translates to the mastering stage. Number 2, the channel EQ analyzer. Tell me if you've ever heard this piece of advice. Mix with your ears, not your eyes. I'm sure you have, and it's not bad advice at all. It just doesn't tell the whole story. That's why I like to add a little addendum to this adage. I say, mix with your ears, but know when your eyes can help you. The fact is, because we're mixing on computers, there are places where looking at information on the screen can actually help you mix better. Sure, there are times when your eyes can deceive you, but not all of the time. Here's a good example. When EQing, we should always identify a problem in the sound by ear first. So when bringing this bass track into the mix, I listened to the sound and thought to myself, the bass is too boomy. To solve this problem, I enabled an EQ on the bass track, and then I used the boost and sweep method to find the problem area. Now, the boost and sweep method can, of course, just be done by listening, but why would we not take advantage of the analyzer display inside of channel EQ to get ourselves into the right area faster? This is especially helpful if you're a beginner and are not super confident in your EQing skills yet. You may be able to hear that there is too much boominess or low end in the bass, but finding that correct frequency to EQ just by boosting and sweeping may still be a challenge for you. Well, check out the analyzer. We can clearly see this big hump in the low end between 75 and 95 Hertz. That's a pretty good clue as to where we need to EQ, right? Start by boosting around that big hump you see in the analyzer and then sweep in a more limited area around it to hone in on the exact spot that's causing the biggest issue. Then reduce the EQ band. It's not cheating to use the analyzer to help you EQ, and it's not your eyes deceiving you either, as long as you listen first to identify the problem and listen at the end to make sure you've indeed solved the problem with the EQ cut. Using the analyzer to hone in on the right frequency range is just an easy shortcut that can make EQing quicker and help you to feel more confident in your decisions. Number 3, using stereo widening on the mix bus. Alert the phase police, we're about to get real spicy here. If I am nearing the end of my mixing process and I still feel like the mix isn't quite popping out of the speakers enough to really excite me, I will add a bit of stereo widening right on the mix bus. Gasp! But what about the correlation, the phase issues? What about mono compatibility? Don't worry. It's not as scary as it seems. And I have a great tip for making sure none of those issues are present coming up. But the key here is subtlety. Can adding a stereo widener to your mix bus create all these evil problems? Oh yeah, you bet it can. But does that mean stereo wideners should be banned from your mix bus for life? Heck no. They can really help give your mix that little bit of extra life that takes it from good to great. Here's how I would use the direction mixer in Logic Pro to open this mix up and add that extra something special. I'm going to start by placing it right before the limiter on my mix bus so that it's the last plugin the track is running through before it hits the limiter. And then I'm going to simply take the spread from 1 to 1.04. Super subtle enhancement of the stereo width.
Drive all night through the west side, to that baseline, hit you just right. Are you doing it? Are you still feeling it? Are you feeling it? Are you still bringing it?
But here's the important trick to using the direction mixer plugin specifically. We have to add a bit of a gain boost after it. When widening the stereo image with the direction mixer, we lose a little bit of gain. So I like to add the gain plugin right after the direction mixer and compensate for this with a 0.5 dB boost. This is a specific quirk of this specific plugin. Not every stereo widener does this. But once we add that little boost, we're now getting that subtle lift and that extra stereo pop that we were after.
Drive all night through the west side, to that baseline, hit you just right. Are you doing it? Are you still feeling it? Are you feeling it? Are you still bringing it? Flex and right, beating up by soft glow light, in the sunshine. Are you doing it? Are you still feeling it? By still banging it? Are you still bringing it?
It still doesn't match my favorite tool to use for this trick, which is Dewey Wide, but it achieves a similar effect and uses only stock plugins. Number 4, mixing in mono. So I mentioned that I had a trick that would help us assess whether any of those dreaded phase issues were present as a result of our stereo widening. So here it is. At the end of your mixing process, always listen to your mix in mono. So you may have heard a few myths about mono along your journey in mixing. One of them is certainly, why would anyone care what things sound like in mono? Everyone listens in stereo nowadays. While the last part of that statement may be true, although I would argue there are more mono playback systems still than you actually realize, this is not really the point of listening to your mix in mono. By collapsing the stereo image down, you remove the separation between instruments that's been achieved with panning. When this goes away, the only separation that's left is done with EQ. So we can hear in harsh reality how well our EQing is separating each instrument. Masking, that is a frequency range from one instrument clouding the sound of another instrument, becomes much more apparent when listening in mono. And we can make adjustments to our EQ to better address these issues that we might not have been able to hear properly when mixing in stereo. It also has the benefit of laying to bear any phase issues in our mix. Again, with the separation of stereo, we may or may not have been able to hear if we pushed that stereo widening too far and created a problem. Phase issues will generally present themselves as a hollowing or thinning out of the sound that takes away from the overall fullness and impact of your mix. If you hear something like this when collapsing to mono, it's a good sign to check your mix for phase problems. These could be in multi-mic sources, in the overuse of stereo widening tools, or in extreme cases, even in bus effects like parallel compression. For our example of making sure our mix bus stereo widening is not causing an issue, here's what I like to listen for. First, we're going to put the gain plugin after the limiter as the very last plugin on our mix bus. And then in it, we're going to switch on the mono button to collapse our mix to mono. I will bypass and unbypass the direction mixer and the gain plugin while listening in mono. And when the processing is enabled, I should still hear that same lifting of the sound that I heard in stereo. If that extra pop is still audible in mono, then we've nailed our settings and are not causing any phase issues.
Drive all night through the west side, to that baseline, hit you just right. Are you doing it? Are you still feeling it? Are you feeling it? Are you still bringing it? Flex and right, beating up by soft glow light, in the sunshine. Are you doing it? Are you still feeling it? By still banging it? Are you still bringing it?
The other myth about mixing in mono you may have heard is that you should do your entire mix while listening in mono. While I wouldn't call this wrong outright, and it may work well for some people, it's not something I recommend. At the end of the day, we are creating a stereo final mix, and the sound of the mix in stereo is the most important thing. So I like to mix in stereo and make the majority of my mixing decisions in stereo. However, I still always check my mix in mono because it's a great tool to use to refine EQ decisions and check for phase issues. Just don't forget to remove the gain plugin from the mix bus after you finished your mono check. Number 5, match EQ. Okay, the controversy may peak with this one. I do not think it is wrong or cheating to use match EQ with a reference track to fine-tune the overall EQ balance of your track, especially if you're a beginner. At my level of mixing, it's not something I do regularly, but that doesn't mean I never do it. If I'm struggling to get a mix in the same ballpark as a reference track, I will still employ this technique. But if you're just starting out and are struggling with every mix to get the music to the same quality level as your professional reference track, then using Match EQ can not only help you to get the song you are currently working on to sound more polished, but it can also help teach you a ton about your own mixing and how to improve in the future. Here's how I would use it. I'll place Match EQ right before the limiter on my mix bus. Then in Match EQ, I will select the reference tab. Because I always like to have my reference track downloaded and brought right into my mix session, I can simply take the region of the reference track and drag and drop it right onto the Match EQ interface. It will analyze the file and create an average frequency curve for the reference. Then I will switch to the current tab, press the learn button, and then play through the entire song I'm mixing start to finish. This will create the average frequency curve for my mix. Then we switch to the EQ curve tab and hit the match button. This creates an EQ to match our song to the tone of the reference song. I find the default settings a little too extreme though. So next I like to bring the smoothing up to 9. This will broaden out the Q of the EQ bands and make them not so sharp. I find this helps the EQ to sound more natural and less aggressive. Then I generally turn the apply slider on the right down to between 30 and 40%. The goal here is to get the overall tonal balance of our mix closer to the reference, not change the tone of our song entirely. So being subtle with Match EQ is usually the way to go to retain the character of our song, but help it live in the same sonic ballpark as our reference. The other little trick that can be helpful with Match EQ is this Fade Extremes feature. By enabling this tick box, we can reduce the amounts of low and high shelf that are added to the extreme ends of the signal. Sometimes I find there's a little too much taken away, especially in the low end, because we are comparing a master level track to a mix level track, and that extra limiting on a master is going to reduce low end more. So if you find the Match EQ is killing your low end a bit too much, enable the Fade Extremes and drag this handle back up the frequency spectrum a bit to remove that low shelf.
Drive all night through the west side, to that baseline, hit you just right. Are you doing it? Are you still feeling it? Are you feeling it? Are you still bringing it? Flex and right, feeling up high, soft glow night, in the sunshine. Are you doing it? Are you still feeling it? By still burning it? Are you still bringing it?
And there we go. We can hear that Match EQ has indeed cleaned up the mix and made it a bit poppier and brighter, which certainly matches my reference track, which is Taylor Swift, by the way. The real power in Match EQ is that we can see what kind of EQ changes it made and use that information to inform our next mix. If I wanted to go for that poppier, brighter sound, I need to mix in a little more 2 to 5K and cut out a little more 200 Hertz and 500 Hertz. Doing this process on several mixes when you are starting out can help you to learn your tendencies and over time adjust your mixing to get the tonal balance you desire. It's not about copying the reference track. That's impossible. It's a different song after all. It's about subtly improving the tonal balance of your song and about learning where your mix is lacking. So there we go. 5 dirty, rotten, cheating hacks that actually make your mixes sound way better. What do you think? Should I be thrown in mixing jail for using these on my client mixes? But before you sound off in the comments, try a few of these in your next mix and then tell me in the comments which one surprised you the most. I guarantee you'll make at least one of them part of your regular mixing routine, if they aren't already. And if you want to go deeper into professional mixing and learn all of my tips, tricks, hacks, and most importantly, my process, then check out my mixing course, Mixing Decoded. Link is in the description box below. And while you're down there, give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more content on mixing, production, and Logic Pro. I'll see you at the studio next time. Thanks.